Growing up in a Mormon household steeped in political conservatism, Madeleine Hahn was raised in an environment where skepticism towards climate science was prevalent. Madeleine faced a profound battle as she sought to reconcile her family's conservative political beliefs with her own evolving understanding of the world, with it coming to the fore when she applied for and was offered the opportunity to intern at the Obama White House. Prevailing sentiment in Madeleine's family was that climate change was nothing more than a political ploy, a narrative propagated by opposing ideologies rather than a scientifically grounded reality. This viewpoint posed a significant challenge to Madeleine's burgeoning awareness of environmental issues as she traveled the world to places far afield as Samoa, Iraq, and Lebanon. While her upbringing instilled in her a strong sense of faith and family, her parents also instilled a thirst for knowledge. This intellectual curiosity has led her to becoming a Gates PhD scholar at Cambridge University, delving deeper into the disparity between culture and the overwhelming evidence supporting the reality of climate change. Along with two colleagues, Madeleine has established Rooted, an organization with a mission to mobilize millions by connecting them with the right climate action opportunity for them. Join us as Madeleine shares the story of her extraordinary journey. So, Madeleine, thank you very much for joining me on Success Matters podcast. We've met through really your company that you've set up and are looking to really change the world with. But in our conversations during that period, you told me a bit about your background, and I really wanted to really have people share and understand your background and what led to you setting up Rooted, the company that you have. So let's begin actually. You told me that you were brought up in quite a traditional and conservative upbringing. So could you share with us a little bit more about what that was like and what that meant, and I suppose what the form it took?
So my parents are actually both in Hollywood. My parents met working on a TV show called Moonlighting back in the 80s.
Oh,
my dad.
All right. Yeah, I remember Moonlighting.
Yeah, you remember Moonlighting? Okay, yeah. That was their show.
I'm old enough.
My dad was the best boy for the lighting department. My mom was a script supervisor. And they met and got married a year later. My dad was Catholic. My mother is Mormon. And my dad ended up converting to Mormonism. And so my mom quit her job so she could be a stay-at-home mom. And she had 4 children. And so they raised us as Latter-day Saints, which is the other word for Mormon. And
Right.
My dad continued to work in the movie industry for his whole career. He actually just retired. So I was raised really under this strong sense of conservative, particularly Reagan conservative America, and very religious. And I'm still religious. And that has been an enormous vein of our life going through. So I was raised to believe that my biggest role would always be to be a mother and a wife. And I never had any expectation that I would have a career at all. I thought, in fact, I recently found a diary I wrote in when I was about 13, where I said I was writing about my dreams for my future, and that it was that I would get married at 26, which I thought was obscenely late because I was giving myself a few extra years to do fun things. And then I would have 4 children that I would homeschool, just like my mother had.
Okay.
And that was it. I had no further dreams because that was what I assumed would be the end of from then on, it would just all be the same, right? So it was a great upbringing. I mean, I was homeschooled. I got to go on a lot of adventures. My family are incredible and loving and wonderful, but they're incredibly political. So, I mean, we listened to conservative talk radio probably 10 hours a day. It was just always on in the background. It was always on in the car when we drove anywhere. My mom has a little speaker that would play it into her ear when she was going to sleep to help her fall asleep. So it was just constant stream of conservative talk radio. And then my mom worked at the Reagan Library in Simi Valley. So we had tons and tons of books on Reagan. And my parents just love Reagan, and they love that whole period. So that was what I was raised with. And as part of that, I was taught that climate change isn't real. And that was nice. Honestly, it was much better than thinking climate change is real for my mental health. It was a happy way to be raised because it felt like the 60s, there were some problems, they fixed them, and then the environment was fine. And I was a very big nature person. I would go hiking all the time. I was a wildlife rehabilitator. So I rehabilitated coyotes and vultures and raccoons with this organization I worked with for years. I took care of horses, and I was a tall ship sailor. So I would sail on these tall ships, like from like these brigantines, the Irving and X.C. Johnson out of Los Angeles. So I was always in nature, and I was always having nature adventures, and I thought it was fine. I thought everything was going okay. And then I later discovered that that wasn't the case.
Right. Okay. Wow. I mean, you crammed a lot into that piece there, and rehabilitating animals, tall ship sailing. Let's talk about tall ship sailing. So, did you do any racing, or was it kind of more of a pastime hobby type thing?
So it was, these ships don't race. They were designed to train young people from the inner city on leadership skills. So they're two brigantines. They're two-masted with square sails on the front and then fore and aft sails on the back mast. And I was just a teenager, and I would go out and teach these other teenagers about basics of sailing. I was considered youth crew. Sometimes we'd be gone for a week. We would go out to Catalina Island. And I just knew how to do all of this. I was taught how to be like a mate, so I could run the deck, basically. And I did that for 4 years. About once a month, I would go for a day to a week every month. It was
Oh, wow.
So it was a great experience.
Yeah, it sounds it. And do you still go sailing now, or is that kind of a little bit in history now?
Well, I wish it weren't. My husband is a Navy. He was in the Navy. He was a naval officer. He was on
Right.
He was the officer of the deck, which meant that he was in charge of the bridge of a massive warship. And so he and I want to get a ship, and we want to sail the world at some point. That's the plan. I'll bring the actual sailing with sails skill, and he'll bring the navigation and everything else skill.
Okay.
Which will be great. But I did become a professional tall ship sailor for a while as well when I was in university.
Right.
As soon as I graduated, I went and be for 5 months and was a live-aboard crew member of a ship called the Pride of Baltimore. And we just sailed all around the Chesapeake Harbor as professional crew, basically. I just lived with 6 other people in one small little forecastle.
Right.
There's a whole story behind it. It was a wild experience. It was not what I expected it to be, but it was a great thing that I did. I'm glad I did it.
So just going back then to your traditional and conservative upbringing, whilst it was traditional and conservative, you still had these opportunities to do things like the tall ship sailing and the animal rehabilitation and all of that.
My parents were all about giving us opportunity. They really are big believers in education. They're big believers in following your dream to whatever extent you can. They just also really believe in the family being the critical piece of life, and that women should be at home with their children. So
Right.
it was an interesting conflict, because I had the best education I could get, and I had all these opportunities, but then I was expected to just stop when I had my children and then invest myself into them and give them the opportunities. And I struggled with that for many years, feeling like I didn't know which direction I would follow.
Yeah, it's a bit of a dichotomy there, isn't it, in many ways, of how you were kind of encouraged to go and experience things, but then there was going to be this cutoff point where, you get married, you have your children, and now you're a stay-at-home mom and you're looking after the family. And of course, family is key, as part of our societal structure. So I kind of understand that. So then what changed? Because you interned at Barack Obama's White House.
Yeah. So as you can imagine, with my parents, they were very happy that I was interning at the White House. They were not happy that I was interning for President Obama. So they were trying to support me very hard, and I really appreciate them for that they were willing to be like, okay, we'll come visit the White House because it's the White House, right? But what changed was I went to BYU, which is a Mormon university in Utah, and that was where I did my full 4-year education. And I got really involved in the Honor Society and a lot of other things. And while I was there, my number one goal was to just get married. And I really struggled to find somebody to get married to. I kept having relationships fall apart. And so I felt like I was really failing in a major way. And at the same time, I was discovering this passion for politics and for world issues. And my continuing passion for the environment never went away. Like I went for a summer to look for goshawks in the national forest in Dixie in southern Utah, where my job was just to help monitor the goshawk population. I did that for 5 months because I just love nature. So while I was there, got to go on 2 study abroads. I went to Jerusalem and lived there for 4 months and was living right on the border of East and West Jerusalem, like smack dab. So that when I would walk out of the eastern side, I'd be in East Jerusalem, and walk out of the western side, I'd be in West Jerusalem. And so by consequence, I was friends with and got to know people from both sides of that issue. And it was so pivotal to me that I really wanted to be doing work in politics and war zones. But then I also went to Cambridge, where I studied how Muslims are treated by the police under the counter-radicalization protocol in the UK called PREVENT. So while I was having all these major international experiences, I decided to go on a mission too, which, if you know Mormon missions, you get sent wherever they want you to go. And I was sent to Slovenia. And Slovenia is a random country that borders on Italy, Austria, Hungary, and Croatia. And there I learned Slovene and spent a year and a half living among the Slovenes and just taught about the gospel to them. And so through these experiences, I started seeing just how many different ways there are to approach the world. It was an extraordinary range of opportunities to see how people think differently about issues I thought were just given, right? And one of these issues was climate change. There was nowhere I went where people thought climate change wasn't real. So it started seeming like where I had come from was just a tiny pocket, a bubble, right? It was a given. Everybody else was like, this is not a political issue. It's just science. So that made me start wondering whether I had been incorrect, right? And then I also started encountering all these other political views and thought maybe the political views that I had been taught weren't necessarily the only approach. So when I finished my degree and went to go live on that ship, I realized that I wanted to do something about international politics and went back to Cambridge. And that was when I was like, at this point, I would love to intern at the White House, and I would do it for President Obama even, because even though I don't necessarily agree with all of his politics, I don't disagree with all of it either. And I think it would be an important way for me to learn. So that's how I got to that point.
Okay, right. No, well, I mean, that's really interesting. The journey that you went on to, I suppose, you broaden your mind, right? Broaden your experiences and take on different perspectives and viewpoints, which is really important because so many of us we become blinkered almost, and we don't open our eyes to the other views around the world. So how was the experience at being interning at the White House?
Well, first of all, I never thought I would get the internship. I just applied for things sometimes to see what would happen. So that was a shock that I got it at all. They called me up in the middle of the night because I was in England, and I told them, please don't call me in the middle of the night, but they did anyway. So it woke me up from sleeping for my interview. Oh my gosh. And I somehow passed it. So I was put in the office of correspondence, and in the correspondence office, there's a lot of interns who read the mail that comes to the president, because if you don't read the mail, you might have a credible threat that if it's missed could be a severe consequence for, the president, his life and his family.
Right.
So they have to read all the mail. So it's a requirement. But within that, there was a sub office that was called Review, which specifically focused on the mail that people had sent in that was the most difficult and the most consequential and required the most thoughtful responses, because the president didn't want to just send like a pro rata response and just say, it's fine or whatever. Just give there were a lot of form responses, but for those ones, we didn't want to give them form responses. So I was put in that office, I think because I was a little older than a lot of the interns were. And my job was every day to just sit there and read these really emotional, intense stories about American lives and the suffering they had experienced and how the policies were affecting them, and then try to find ways to respond as appropriately as possible. It was all about empathy. The whole experience being in the White House was about empathy. And then on occasion, we would get to do fun things. Every major leader in the White House speaks to the interns at one point. So we spoke, every one of the principals, the president and his wife and the vice president and his wife all spoke to us at some point, and then all of the other senior staff. So we got to have direct lessons from everyone, which was extraordinary. We got to be involved in South by South Lawn, where I would that was a big event on the South Lawn where they had all the world's best tech organizations there. And in the Halloween event for all the kids that came to the White House. There was just lots of fun things on the side. But the main meat of it was just being there for the American people and responding to them in a really sensitive way. And I hadn't expected that.
And were you expected to draft a response that then went via the president's office back to them, or how did that kind of process work?
So there's actually a fabulous expose on this that was written in the New York Times Magazine while I was there. So you can read, if anybody's interested, they can read more about it there. But what we would do is we would come up with some ideas for how we could respond. We would often pull from other language the president had already used. It would go through a process with multiple people in the office who would review it. And sometimes we would just send it to the person in charge of the whole office, who would then give it to the president. And the president would respond himself. That happened 10 letters a day he would respond to himself, which is a lot of letters a day to respond to for one person. But he would do that. So I would very often get letters that I had picked out, sent just to him because we wanted his own personal response. It was a real intense process to respond appropriately to a lot of those letters.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you then went traveling and did some stuff around the world in places like Iraq and Lebanon and in places like that. So how did that come about?
Well, that was because Trump won the presidency. And we had not anticipated this. So I did not have a very good plan for what I would do next, and nor did anyone else, because in the thing that happens in DC, and I think it's probably true of London and a lot of other major political capitals, is when a new political party comes into office, about a third of the entire populace of that city is suddenly out of work because they are political appointees of that party, right? And so I was suddenly out of work and I couldn't find a job because these were jobs for Republicans that were now coming in. So I was a temp, and I just fell sideways into this opportunity to work in Iraq and Lebanon because I went to a service day event for Martin Luther King Jr. And when I was at this event, somebody told me about this opportunity. But it was great because it was a way to help shore up democracy. And if anything, one of my core beliefs is that people should have the ability to make their own decisions and to have their own decisions have meaning, right? They shouldn't be controlled too much. And that we all as a community can come together and make decisions for society. And that's democracy, right? And that's also a big part of what Rooted is. And so I was really excited to go do this. So I went to Iraq and Lebanon several times. And in Lebanon, I helped to organize an international observation electoral mission, which is essentially they go and watch an election happen and report on whether it was free and fair. So we did that in Beirut, the first election they'd had in 10 years, because the parliament kept putting off their own election. Very confusing. Yeah. So we were reporting on that, and I helped to organize that whole thing. And that was, like a once in a lifetime kind of an experience.
Was that under the auspices of the UN, or what's the sort of agency that brings that together?
So the National Democratic Institute was the organization I worked for, and they are funded by the Democrat Party in the U.S. There's also the International Republican Institute, and they're funded by the Republican Party. And they do, both organizations do the exact same work all over the world. It's one of the few examples of actual, coming together and homogeneity and thinking in the U.S. government these days. I could work at IRI without any issue because there's no real difference. So it was the U.S. government largely that would fund it, but we would also get funding from British government and from a couple of other European governments.
So that was Lebanon. You made sure the election was observed to be free and fair, and then Iraq.
Yeah. Well, I should say about Iraq, I was there for a month in August. And this is one of those things that started me to really pivot away from democracy work towards the environment, because I was there in August. So it was 46 to 50 degrees every day. And I was in Erbil in a compound that was walled and armed, as they typically are when you're in this situation. And I would be in this kind of a tower that I was living in for that month. And I would look out at these other towers across the way that were not in the compound, and they would have their windows open, which seemed insane to me because being out in that heat for even 20 minutes, and you can faint, right? It can kill you. It's not, this is not sustainable heat. So I didn't understand why their windows were open. So I thought maybe they were unoccupied, but they weren't unoccupied. I would see people walking by and walking around, and it was because they don't have air conditioning. That people in Iraq, because of the political situation, can't get access to air conditioning, so they have to live day in, day out in 120-degree weather, which, I mean, made me almost faint multiple times. And there was also another crisis with the water supply being tainted with salt in southern Iraq. That was killing people that way. Their food was spoiling because the electricity kept going out. And a lot of people do die from heat stroke in Iraq on a regular basis. So the climate crisis was pretty clear. And even then, I would look beyond those towers into the distance. I could see flames. And those flames were from oil refineries, right?
Right.
So right there was the oil refinery that was producing the heat, which was affecting these people who then couldn't protect themselves because the political system wasn't such that would allow them any kind of shielding from the heat that would otherwise kill them. It was just like a single picture to embody the entire problem. And that was pretty hard for me to escape, that image. It really stuck with me for a long time after that.
So having that image kind of etched on your mind, was that the kind of pivotal moment where you thought, I need to do something different and really focus on the climate and climate change?
Well, I mean, it kind of creeps up on you, as many things do, but there was a moment where things changed. Mm-hmm. I was taking a winter break. This was actually a little bit earlier, because at this point I had kind of decided I needed to move into climate work when I was in Iraq, but I hadn't really done it. I was just like, maybe I'll just do this for a while longer. And Iraq really got me to think, okay, I can't. But before that, the thing that had made me realize this wasn't something I could stop thinking about was I went to Germany for Christmas to visit a friend, and I was on a train, and I accidentally picked up The Road by Cormac McCarthy when I was at a bookstore, because I meant to pick up On the Road by Jack Kerouac, which is as opposite a book from The Road as you could possibly get. And I didn't realize that. A friend of mine had just said, I love The Road. And she had said On the Road, but I thought it was The Road. So I was reading The Road, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, a devastating book about a post-apocalyptic world where there's some kind of unknown problem has singed the sky gray. Everything is dead. And the few people who remain are often like marauding cannibals. And the only two characters that we really get to know are a man and a boy who are never named, and who are spending the whole time walking down the road to try to get to the sea in this vain hope that the sea might actually be a place of freedom from this horrible world they're living in. And the story is really about what is there to live for if there's nothing left of beauty and wonder in the world at all. And, one of the conclusions could be, well, the love between just these two people was enough. But I was reading this extraordinary, wrenching book on this train in Germany, and when I finished it, it was sunset, and the sun was setting over a marsh, and it was in the winter, so it was all sparkling with frost. And so it was gold and ice outside the window.
Yeah.
And it was shining gold all through the train. And I was genuinely stunned to see that sunset and to see that beauty, because I had been sucked into this world of darkness for several hours. And it occurred to me for the first time ever that this might actually go away. And that it might be that there's a day where there won't be sunsets like this anymore, and that this is fragile. It had never felt fragile. It had felt inevitable. Of course, every day is going to have another sunset and sunrise, and it's going to be fine, and there's going to be nature. But now it suddenly didn't feel that way. And I remember even at the White House and working at NDI, I would sometimes wake up. I was living right next to a forest, and I would hear these birds singing, and I would be shocked that they were still there, because this feeling of fragility just started to permeate every ounce of me. And this fear that everything would just slip away from me in a moment. It was kind of like the nuclear scare in the 80s, the way people felt about the world just disappearing, right? That was what happened to me, but it was about the climate crisis. And I didn't know it was called climate anxiety. I don't think I learned that word until just like 5 years ago. So 4 or 5 years ago. So I just felt like this ever-increasing burden, and I couldn't talk to anyone about it. So that was the moment that it really changed. But I decided to go into climate work a little bit later, after I had left NDI to get married.
Right. Did you have, because you said you were brought up in a world where climate change was, this isn't real, this is just nonsense, to having this moment where you're you're looking at that, was there a conflict inside you that said, yeah, you were brought up with these kind of values and now it's changed? How did you handle that conflict?
Well, the hardest part for me was my mother is, she's just a woman full of certitude and passion, a lot like me. She's given here her intensity of her passion. And I hated feeling like I was disappointing her. That was the hard part. I felt like she felt that I had been misled. And I wanted so much more than anything to show her that I was doing well and that I'm not walking down a dark, bad path. But I also wanted to honor what I came to believe to be true and thought that what she believed in was no longer true. So it was an enormous conflict. It was a constant conflict. And that conflict persisted until I was pregnant in Abu Dhabi, which was right after, after a year after I got married, we moved to Abu Dhabi. So I should just say before saying about that, I decided I wanted to do climate work, right? But I wasn't sure how or when I would do that because I was getting married. And here we are, finally. I achieved the goal. I had met someone, I was going to get married, and I still thought, okay, I'll just be a stay-at-home mom, right?
Okay.
I've had the fun 10 years. Now I'm going to focus and do the staying-at-home mom thing. And so, but my husband wasn't that big on board with that because he actually wants to have a wife who can do whatever she wants. He wants me to have that freedom. And he's like a super big advocate for women being strong, independent people who can do whatever they want. And I wasn't expecting that. So that was awesome. But we were asked to babysit for my cousin's 5 children one weekend. And I had lived with them when I was at the White House. So I was very happy to do this. And while I was there, I read the book by Tara Westover. Books change my life all the time. It's really fun. Reading. But I read this book by Tara Westover, Educated. And Tara Westover, she's just like me. She was a Gates Cambridge scholar. She's a Mormon. She actually had the same mentor I had at UIU. And the same guy who told her to go to Cambridge was the guy who told me to go to Cambridge. So reading about him in the book, I was like, that's weird. He's my mentor. But I read that book and saw her journey. And as I was reading it, I thought, maybe I can do more too. I don't just have to do this. And my husband was like, thank you. He finally got that. So glad. So that was when I realized I needed to actually have a career and started thinking I would go into climate and I would do it, but I didn't know how. So I thought I'd get a PhD, applied to Cambridge, got the Gates scholarship. And then we moved to Abu Dhabi.
And Abu Dhabi move was with work, with your husband's work? How did that?
Yeah, that was my husband's work.
About?
Yeah.
Okay.
My plan was we were going to be there for a little while. I didn't know if I'd gone into Cambridge yet. I had already applied, but was waiting. I thought I would work and find a job there maybe. And then I got pregnant and had a horrific pregnancy that almost killed me multiple times. I had hyperemesis gravidarum, which is where you can't eat or drink and you slowly starve / dehydrate. And without modern medicine that can infuse you with saline, you would die from dehydration. And in fact, years later, I had an ancestor who died that way.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Oh, wow. Is that what people would refer to as really severe morning sickness? Or is it something different?
It is the most extreme form. So Kate Middleton had it. Amy Schumer's had it. It's so extreme that it has its own name, basically. Morning sickness is just more like it affects your life and it's not fun. But this is go to the hospital, you're going to die. So I had that. And I was bedbound for months. And I was living on the other side of the world alone. And COVID was starting. So
wow.
We were completely isolated. My family was 7,000 miles away. And I would just lay in bed all day when my husband was at work. And then he would come home and try to give me food and water so that I could survive. And then after that went away, after 4 months, then I lost the ability to walk for the next 4 months. I had about a month where things were fine. And we never figured out why. I was hospitalized for weeks. They did every test they could on me. It was horrible. But then it went away when I had the baby. So it was a terrible pregnancy. And during that experience, my mom came. And this is where it comes back to this crisis that we were talking about. Mm-hmm. My mom came and she would sit next to me and try to force feed me and give me water so that I wouldn't die, right? Like that was
Right.
the rule. All day long, she would just give me dripples of water that I wouldn't vomit up because it was small enough portions. And while we were there, I was telling her about going to Cambridge, maybe I was going to do this career. And she would talk about how she was concerned about whether I was going to be a good enough mother since I'm going to have a baby now, right? And it was horrible. It was heart-wrenching. It was so difficult because I wanted her to know that I would always be a good mother. And she wanted to ensure that I would be because, of course, she wants her granddaughter to be well-raised. But it was during that time that I finally started seeing her in the way that I should have for many years, which is that she's just a person too. We're all just people.
Yeah.
You know, she is a wonderful, incredible person, but her opinions aren't necessarily the guiding light that I need in my life to follow, that I can find my own path now. And when she left, that was when I started to really think, if I take my own steps in a different direction from where she wants me to step, I can still be okay. And we can still have a relationship. And that's what I've been doing since then, really.
Wow. You've been on quite a journey, right? It's a very fascinating story. So you've now set up a company called Rooted. What does Rooted do, and what's it about?
Well, Rooted is going back to these main themes, right? It goes back to the theme of climate anxiety, and of wanting people to have a voice. And I mean, when I was living in Abu Dhabi, I was living under a dictatorial system, and there were times that I was trying to report terrible things that were happening to people, and I was worried about being imprisoned, which is a whole different thing. But like that feeling of oppression, of not having choice and not having freedom to have an influence over something, it was a horrible experience. And that's the truth for almost everybody in the world right now when it comes to climate change. Most of us feel like we have no power. It's all gone. It's just, hopefully the governments will fix it and the businesses will fix it. And so we're left with this devastating idea that maybe one day we'll wake up and the sky will have been singed and the world will be dark and we'll have lost, it'll be gone, and I will have done nothing to save it, right? So Rooted is all about giving that power to people because there's no reason why we can't have it. It's only the structures we have built that have prevented us. But we built them so we can reshape them. So Rooted is about reshaping those structures by building a system that allows people to take grassroots action on a worldwide scale. Because right now you think, okay, I could do something, but what? We'll help you. We'll connect you. We'll talk to our AI and tell them where you're from, what you're doing, what you're interested in, what your skills are, and they'll find organizations that you can volunteer for right now. They'll find places you can donate to right now. Or if you're in a place where nobody's doing anything, they'll connect you with people who you can build your own organization with, give you a toolkit for building your own organization. Or if you're just saying, I don't even know what climate change is, we'll direct you towards all the materials you need to learn, right? It's about educating and empowering the whole person, regardless of where you're starting, to get you to where you need to go, so that we have community groups we'll have a community group in this part of India where our CTO is located, who can then actually organize themselves in a way that they can get the government to clean up the rubbish at the end of the road, which is something that we've been talking to those people recently. There's an eco-village in Ghana we've been speaking with, and this would help them to connect with each other in a way that is much simpler than anything they've done before and much more seamless, right? Like just think about 19-year-olds who go to university and are going to their therapist saying, I don't know if there's even a future for me in 10 years. We're giving them the tools to say, okay, I can still do something. Even if it doesn't fix the future in 10 years, it will help me feel powerful for the first time, right? So this is a worldwide opportunity for us to re-empower ourselves and make it so that the climate crisis isn't just top down. Now we're fixing it from the bottom up.
Okay. And so Rooted, if people want to get involved with Rooted, it's visit your website? Is that the best way to do that?
Yeah. So visit the website, sign up for our, we've got a waiting list right now because we've got a prototype. We particularly want people from all over the world, especially the Global South, to sign up because we want to show that the Global South is waiting and ready to do more about climate change, right? And we also we're trying to get funding right now. So anybody who has connections to that, let us know. We're just starting this journey. We've got an amazing team behind us of advisors. We've got an amazing team of our CTO and COO and me on board. And we're really going to make this happen. But in the most support we can get, the better.
Yeah. Get the word out there, get everyone supporting. And Rooted also has an element around for corporates as well, right? Corporate social responsibility element to that. And how does that work?
So corporations are trying pretty hard. About 40% in the UK want to improve what they're doing on ESG. So it would be to get them connected to the best opportunities for their employees to volunteer and for them to donate and match those donations, but in a way that's specifically climate oriented, which means that it won't just be like most corporate donation platforms of a few options across a huge range. Since we're just doing climate, it's going to have a ton of options on this one area, which means you can really focus in on what you want your corporation to achieve.
And so I know you're really just starting up with Rooted, but in 5 years' time, say, what do you expect Rooted to look like and what sort of change do you expect it to have made?
So in 5 years, we expect to be all over at least 20 different countries, if not more, where we've got all of these organizations on our database. You can go on there. You can find places to get involved. There are people who are building their organizations on Rooted. We're helping to fund them with our profits. That's one of the things we're going to do. And by consequence, this has become the way that people think, I want to do something about climate change. I'm going to go on Rooted and figure out what to do. It becomes the just normal approach, right? The nomenclature.
Right.
That's our goal because we just can't wait. We can't wait for people to take action. We're going to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. That's cool. So one of the traditions I have is I ask a previous guest to ask a question for my next guest. I kind of feel I know what the answer will be on this, but we'll read out the question. Let's see what comes. So the question from my previous guest is,
if you could go back in time and remember what success meant to you when you were 18, how does that differ from whatever age you are now?
Yeah, that's funny. I think what success means, like on the deeper level, is actually the same, but in the higher level, it isn't. So for the deeper level, it is, I have 3 things I'm trying to achieve in my life. I'm trying to love my family and friends as well as I can. I am trying to do as much good as I can for the world while I'm here. And I'm trying to experience as much of life as I can. Those are my 3 goals.
Right.
And that hasn't changed. But what has changed is thinking that I can do that. I can have a broader effect than just on my little family. I can have a big effect on the whole world. I'm really grateful to that. I've had those mentors have helped me get there.
Yeah, I mean, you said right at the beginning, right, that you thought age 26 you'd be married and that would be kind of it in terms of you'd now be a mother, and now that has changed. So yeah, like I said, I kind of expected what the answer would be. Do you have a question for my next guest?
When you think about success, we always talk about it in terms, success is just coded for money, essentially. We say, he's very successful. That means that he's rich. So how do you think we can redefine what success means more broadly?
Okay, that's cool. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think if we start talking about it more regularly in terms of that success is not, I mean, GDP is a terrible measure for society and communities, right? There are new measures being built. Those are different ways of describing success. So if we can elevate those different ways of thinking, like happiness indexes, like that's real success, right? I think we just need to continually elevate that, and then we'll be building out a system where success isn't just about money. Success is about living whole, happy, and healthy lives.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, I mean, that's why I set up this podcast series, was because I started to feel that I had defined my world of success by monetary things and material things, and it's not that. And so I wanted to explore with lots of people what success means to them. So that's been really great, and it's a good question, kind of good segue for my next guest to talk about what success means to them. So thank you very much for today's conversation. It's been a fantastic conversation. I'm sure we could talk for another 5 hours about your life experiences and where you've been and the journey you've been on, but unfortunately we're at the top of our time. So just for the benefit of those that want to get in touch, what's the website for Rooted?
Rooted, ROOTD with no E, and then .earth. And just go there and sign up on our thing, and you'll start getting emails once we launch.
Okay, cool. And if people want to get in touch with you, is there what's the best way to get in touch with you directly if they want to?
There and there's a little chat function, and you type in the response, it goes straight to my email.
Okay, brilliant. That's great. Well, thanks very much, Madeleine. It's been like I said, a fascinating conversation, and I could probably talk for another 5 hours with you in terms of all the journey that you've been on and experiences you've had.
Well, thank you so much, Sandre. I really appreciate this chance.
Thank you. If you'd like to find out more about how you can find your success, contact me at info@successmatterscoaching.com. That's info@successmatterscoaching.com.